Good morning. Today is Thursday, April the 4th, 2019, and we are in the home of John and Pat Willis in Tallahassee, Florida. My name is Lynn McLarty, a member of Trinity United Methodist Church's Historical Society. The videographer for this interview is Rex Adams, the Director of Communications at Trinity. John was the senior minister at Trinity from June 1999 until his retirement from Trinity and the Florida Conference in June of 2008. He and Pat have continued their involvement with Trinity since his retirement. Today's interview will allow John and Pat an opportunity to share with us their life together in the ministry for the Methodist Church. To begin with, John, please start with the early years of your life and fill us in as we come up to the present, and I'll be asking you some questions as we go through as a prompt.
Sure, sounds good. Thank you. I appreciate this very much, this opportunity. I was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, raised in Atlanta, ended up going to college at North Georgia College, which at the time was the only coeducational military college in the country. And after 4 years of marching around there and in between my studies and singing, I want to be an airborne ranger, I want to live a life of danger, I graduated as a second lieutenant, went to military police school, and then to, as they call it, jump school to learn how to jump out of airplanes. Then I went to Fort Bragg for a year, and then from there I took a lovely overseas trip for 1 year in Vietnam. While I was there, I was with an MP company, but also I had a sentry dog platoon and had 75 German Shepherds under my command, but I never dealt directly with any of them because it was always one man, one dog. And anyway, did that, and after a year in Vietnam, I decided the Army was not the career for me. And so I left and ended up going to work for an insurance company, and they said, John, you finished your training, you have two choices. You can go to Nashville, Tennessee, or you can go to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I was like 23, 24, and that was a no-brainer. I went to Fort Lauderdale and was there a year or so, and then ended up in the Methodist Church in Fort Lauderdale, and that's where I met Pat, and after...
What year was this?
Oh, well, we were married.
About around 1969.
69. So we're active there, and after a year or so of my involvement there, felt God's call to go to seminary, and so left Fort Lauderdale and Pat, and I went to Atlanta to Emory to seminary at Candler School of Theology. And after 1 year there, Pat and I got married and moved to Atlanta and finished there after 2 years, and left there and went to First Church, West Palm Beach, for our first assignment, and on through until we got to Trinity a number of years later. So,
Do you remember a seed that prompted you to say, I want to go to the ministry? Was there an
well,
event?
one
Was
of the
there-
things that
or
happened...
just having lived through Vietnam?
No. Some people ask me, where did you grow up? And I say, in Vietnam. So, but it was just a gradual feeling over time. It didn't come all at once, and over time, I felt like God was calling me to go to seminary. He said, well, he's calling you to be a minister. I said, well, no, because, I mean, you know, you could get a seminary degree and teach, or be an urban ministry, or the pastorate, or a chaplain, or, I mean, there are a number of things you could do. So, but I felt like the next step was there. And one of the things that happened in seminary was that halfway through, middle of my second year, it was the beginning of the second semester, and I went to my advisor and I said, I'm going to quit. This is it. This is not for me. I don't think I'm where God wants me, and so I'm not going to do this. And very wise man, my advisor said, look, give it one more semester, and take whatever you want. If that doesn't work out, then I'll support you and you can leave. So I said, okay. In the meantime, I was working at a church near where we lived on a part-time basis as their assistant and their youth director. And one Sunday morning, I was sitting in the congregation with the youth, and it came, and which was not usual. Normally I was up in the pulpit as the liturgist, but this particular Sunday it was a special Sunday, and I was sitting with the youth in the congregation, and it came time for them to sing and the choir. And so it was time for them to get up and go up, and so I said, get up again, go. And all of a sudden, two of the young men grabbed me by the arms, led me up into the center of the chancel area, and the entire youth group surrounded me while they sang their hymn. And at that moment, I said, maybe I am where God wanted me to be. Maybe I am where I'm supposed to be. And so from then on, I kind of felt like
Outside that stirring story, were there any other positions you had on Saturday or Sunday while you were in theology school at Candler that you remember as a unique?
not
No.
really, Pat, do you?
So Pat, you had a family started by then?
No,
No.
Okay.
Our first son was born in West Palm Beach in our first
In your
appointment.
first appointment, okay.
Mhm.
So I know when I was at Emory, we lived in real small apartments, and I take it as graduate students, y'all did.
We lived in an apartment off campus. I
Uh-huh.
was teaching,
Mhm.
and so we lived near the school where I taught.
What school did you teach?
I taught in a little school, a private school called the Village School. It was almost a little one-room schoolhouse
Huh.
that was run by
Was
a,
it close to Emory?
No.
we were on the other side of town.
People that were in the church, maybe ministers or bishops that were
Yeah.
a great influence to you through the years
When-
of your development
Well-
as a minister in the pulpit.
Before I went into the ministry, we were at Park Temple United Methodist Church in Fort Lauderdale, where Pat and I were members. And the senior pastor there, who was Mike Cleveland, and his wife Alice, well, actually the way we got there is I was raised in the Presbyterian church, and got away from the church while I was in Vietnam and all, and I had an aunt in Orlando, and she said, you need to go back to church. There's a big Presbyterian church at Fort Lauderdale, why don't you go there? So I went by the church when I was working. I had on my coat and tie, and I had my business card, and said, I need to see a minister. I was wrestling with some things with my faith, and so they said, oh, no ministers available. I said, okay, I understand that, but here's my card, here's my phone number. Please have somebody contact me. Never heard the first thing from that church. So about a month later, my aunt writes back and says, the Presbyterians didn't work out, why don't you try the Methodists? Our former senior pastor from Orlando is serving in Fort Lauderdale, and he and his wife are really fine folks. And I took the letter and I laid it down. I said, well, that's nice. I swear, 2 minutes later, the phone rings, and this woman on the other end said, John, this is Alice Cleveland. My husband is senior pastor of the Park Temple United Methodist Church, and I teach a Sunday school class for young singles. Will you come this Sunday? I said, well, I'm not doing anything Sunday morning, so yeah. And always what I like to say is when I walked into that classroom, I was a little bit early, nobody else was there, except this young woman was pouring a cup of coffee when I walked in. And that woman was Pat.
Oh.
And I've loved
That was
coffee
your
ever
first-
since.
Your first Sunday at that,
Yeah.
visiting that church.
And,
Had you been a member there for a long time?
About a year.
About a year?
Yeah,
Okay.
she
So
moved there
you
to
were-
teach, and so,
Uh-huh.
anyway, so Mike and Alice both spent a lot of time with both of us, and in particular with me, and were very influential in my going into the ministry. And actually, I served as his associate on one of my earlier appointments, and he asked me to come with him and serve, which I did.
So after theology, you came back and you were aligned with him?
Yeah,
Wow,
later,
good. Uh-huh.
the First Church Clearwater.
Several years
Yeah, a
after.
couple.
Any others,
Yeah.
any other ministers that we might know the name,
Those
or
were,
bishops or?
well, yeah, well, Gene Zimmerman
Mhm.
was very much so, and one of the things that was really interesting, I thought, and I never in my wildest dreams thought it would happen, is I followed Walter Califf, former senior pastor at Trinity, at two different churches. One was St. Luke's, which he started in St. Petersburg, and then here at Trinity. So,
Gene's the reason that Miriam and I are at Trinity.
okay,
He's the reason, and that's another story. But,
yeah,
And
So-
Walter Califf,
Oh.
or Califf,
Yeah,
right.
was my pastor in Tampa when I was in high school. And when we got married, he did our wedding. So
he and Mike
married us
he and Mike Cleveland both did our wedding.
before we
Those are
actually
good.
ever.
Good. Tell us about your family then, before we get John into Trinity's
All right.
unique situations and happenings there. So please tell.
Okay,
Please tell.
well, I was teaching school in Atlanta, and I was
Excuse
there
me,
for 2
sorry.
years while he finished seminary. And then we moved to West Palm Beach, Florida, for his first appointment as an associate pastor. And our first son Keith was born there into that church, and it was a real celebration. He was the first baby born into that congregation to a pastor for a number of years, and so they really celebrated with us. And then following his birth, we stayed there a couple of years, and then we moved on to Mulberry United Methodist Church, where our second son Todd was born. And they are obviously now grown, and Keith is a CPA in Atlanta, and he's married and has 2 children. And Todd is an attorney in Orlando and married and has 3 children.
Thank you. I'm gonna get back with you to tell
Okay.
some stories of Trinity. John, you came in
99.
in 99, and you were met with quite a plate full of happenings. And
First of all, I was
you
thrilled to be here.
thrilled to be here. Okay.
Oh, just, Trinity has an excellent reputation throughout Florida. People I didn't know and all heard I was coming here at the annual conference and came up to me and said, oh, I wish I could go to Trinity. It's just the greatest church ever. So we're just thrilled. And, but that first 6 months, it was something else. I've never experienced anything like it before. First Sunday I was there, of course, preached and the reception. On Monday morning, they came in and started to dismantle the interior of the sanctuary to put in a already paid for completely 3,000 pipe organ, and they had to redo the sanctuary in order to have the proper acoustics for this sanctuary. They told me there's nothing else like this in North Florida anywhere, and but it took them 6 months to do that, and it wasn't until Christmas that got in. We finished that. We had the 175th anniversary of Trinity. Had the former bishop and the mayor, and I mean, it was a major deal within the church. We then also had
Godfrey's.
oh yeah,
That was in November.
Godfrey Smith had been CEO of Capital City Bank Group and probably the most influential man in Tallahassee in the previous 50 years. Well, we got to know Godfrey rather well. I mean, in those few months we were there before he died. And so I remember going and saying, well, who do you want? Would you like the president of the university or somebody in the state government to do his funeral, or some former pastors? And they looked at me and said, no, Godfrey wanted you and only you.
It was standing room only.
It was,
It
probably the largest.
the largest that
Yeah.
most people I've ever seen at
Yeah,
Trinity.
yeah.
And,
I mean, they turned people away. I remember that. So we got through that. Then we had a special called church conference over and above the $1,000,000-something budget, which was at the time the largest I'd ever had to raise. And then they said, we need to borrow an extra $500,000 to do some renovation while we're doing the organ. I said, borrow $500,000 more. And they said, yeah. I said, okay. So we had the church conference and they voted to do that. We had a number of staff members who had planned to already before I arrived. I thought maybe it was me, but they assured me it wasn't, that resigned or retired, or so you always have to deal with that kind of issue and finding the right people. So it was just a wild time.
this was 99.
99.
November of 2000 brought
Then
a
we
unique
moved on
experience to the electorate,
Yeah,
especially here in Tallahassee with the Chads.
but
Was there something
yes.
prior to that?
I get my dates mixed up. At some point, I felt like Trinity needed a focus in which we could pull together and all move in the same direction. And Pentecost has always been important to me. And Pentecost, the first year I just spent kind of, learning the ropes and how do we do this and what's been done there and so forth. But then Pentecost came and I had prayed about it, and I found the scripture at Pentecost that was just prior to then, where Jesus said, stay in the city until you have received power from the Spirit or from on high. And so I said, for the next year, that's what we're going to do. We're going to stay in the city, and we're going to pray for God to guide us and see what our focus should be. But that's where we spend, 90% of our time is here in the city. So that was then, and then November 2000 was the national election where, remember, it was Bush and Gore, and there was no clear winner, and they had the Supreme Court here and the U.S. Supreme Court, and it was going for about a month. They couldn't figure out which one was president, and the Supreme Court for Florida is about 2 blocks down the street from Trinity, maybe 3. And so a lot of the activity in this stuff was right around us. And at one point they said, we've got to recount these ballots. And they decided to recount them at the library, which is right next door to Trinity. And Trinity owns the parking lot for the library, but the library leases it during the week. And I got this call on Saturday from actually from one of the ushers, who said, the police have the entire parking lot of the library blocked off and nobody can get in that parking lot because they're recounting the ballots in the hanging chads. So I said, what are we going to do? Because probably 75% of our folks on Sunday morning park in that library parking lot. So in my infinite wisdom, I said to him, I don't know what we're going to do. We'll just have to wait and see. Well, it turned out that afternoon, I had a wedding.
On Saturday afternoon?
On Saturday afternoon at Trinity. And so I go there and park in my parking place at the back of the church, and across the street I could see the parking lot in the library, and they had all these protesters outside. Some of them with signs saying, Bush will win, others said, Gore will win. Said, okay, so went in and had the wedding, came back out, and all the protesters were gone. Nobody was there. And it turned out the U.S. Supreme Court had stopped the recount, so we didn't have any problems with that. So
To get out of the hands of the Florida
Supreme
Okay.
Court, and they, so then, so that was, and then 2001, in that Pentecost again, I said, we've done this for a year, and I really prayed about it. And I said, you know, I really feel like we're doing the right thing with this stay in the city, because you know, that's kind of where our heart is. And I said, that's it. Maybe we can say we're the church with the heart for the city. I said, but we need a symbol. I've always been big on symbols. And so I developed and drew this little red heart and put a T in the center. I mean, T is for Trinity. And I said, well, T is for Tallahassee. And then T is also for the cross. Most biblical scholars believe that Jesus' cross was not the plus sign, but was more like a capital T, and that he actually carried the crossbar to the, and so T is for Trinity, who we are, Tallahassee, where we are, and the cross, whose we are. And so that Pentecost, we gave out those pins to everyone who was a member, and then every time someone would join after that, they were given a little card with what I just said on it, and a heart pin to wear.
There we go.
And after that, I decided that we should have different initiatives to make this Heart for the City happen. And each year we'd have a different special initiative. For example, we started mentoring at Kate Sullivan Elementary School and invited people to do that. We worked with the Providence community and helping them. So, I mean, there were a number of different things like that we did in our outreach to the city. And one of the other things I decided would be a good thing was what I call the Capital Faith Forum, in which we invite different community leaders. I mean, we had former attorney generals and university presidents and business industry CEOs in, and had them talk for 15 minutes on how my faith influences my work. We then had 15 minutes of special music from different groups in the community. And then for half an hour, we had a lunch downstairs in Moore Hall that was, and we opened this to the community and advertised. The first time we had one, it was, I was at home that morning and was in my study working, and Pat came and said, "You won't believe this, but an airplane just flew in to one of the towers in New York City. I said, whoa. So I went in and started riveted by the TV, seeing the smoke come out of the building, and then, of course, wasn't a few minutes later that the second plane hit the next tower. And I remember standing there just mesmerized by this, and Pat kept saying, you need to get to the church. You need to get to the church. I said, okay. So we left. And of course, our first Capital Faith Forum that day was on September 11th, 2001. The speaker we had was Charlie Wells, who was the Chief Justice while the debate was raging with the presidential election with the vote recount and all. And he was to come and talk about that and his faith. And so I called him, and we were talking about what we would do, and he said, well, and what folks who don't remember or weren't there at that time and that day, there was a lot of uncertainty. People did not know what was going to happen next. We did not know what was coming. Was this a full-scale attack? Would there be more? We just didn't know. And Charlie said, well, they were debating on whether or not to close the Supreme Court. And so Jeb Bush was George Bush's president, President George Bush's brother, and Jeb was governor at the time, so they didn't know if there might be, in a 22-story Capitol, there might be attack there. So all the state workers were dismissed, and they did close the court. But people were kind of at a loss, and what we decided is to continue with this Capital Faith Forum. But instead of having speakers and all, we would make this a prayer service. And it really turned out well because it gave people a place to come. Charlie Wells said a few words, I said a few words. We had a time of prayer, and our musician for that day was a harpist. And she played the harp as people were praying, and then we went down and had lunch. While we were having lunch, there was a phone call, and it was one of the radio stations that called and wanted to speak to me, and I went and said yes, and they said, we're really concerned, would you pray for the city? So I remember the phone was in the kitchen. I remember I went inside the pantry and closed the door and had a prayer for the city. But it was a tumultuous day, to say the least. But, Trinity was right in the heart of it, really. One of the other things that happened in relation to that is a lot of the people that died, of course, were firefighters. And we had decided before 9/11, the previous summer, to have in January what we call Community Sunday, where we would have a special Sunday where we would invite and honor people who served our community, to say thank you to them. And we had chosen, back in June or somewhere, firefighters. And so several months after 9/11, we had the firefighters, some sitting down, and some, they had their own color guard that they brought in and marched in behind the crowd. And when people saw those firefighters, remembering that those were the people who had died during their duty in New York City, let me just tell you, there was not a dry eye in the congregation. It really turned out well. And we went on for several years after that with police officers and teachers and nurses and different things. So, and we had, tried to do a number of different things to further that.
May we interrupt your
Sure.
speaking, let Pat
Certainly.
bring forward a couple of
By
points
all
that you
means.
remember of Trinity, of your maybe association with ladies groups or with unique people around that you remember as Trinity members.
Okay.
And then John, we're gonna go, when we come back to your Oxford experience, please, and then the Linton journals that you
Okay.
started, and then we will remember those two things. So thank you. Pat, please.
Trinity, I have a real heart for Trinity. As Johnny has said, it is a special church, and they welcomed us with open arms. And I will just tell you two stories. I was very, very nervous coming to Trinity because I knew David and Cinda Horton very well. And Cinda is a tall, stately, lovely lady with many, many talents. And when I found out that we were coming to Trinity, my first thought was, oh my goodness, how am I going to be the preacher's wife to follow her? And so I came with much fear and trepidation. But as the Trinity Church is, they opened their arms to me and they welcomed me just as I was and gave me an opportunity to be who I am. But I have a story that is a really neat story about Godfrey Smith, because when we came to have our first meeting with just the church staff and the staff parish before the congregation met us, we had a meeting here, and we met Godfrey Smith. He was one of the people that we were introduced to, and they took us to the bank, and he took us upstairs to the great boardroom with this huge table, and I ended up, for a few moments, it was just Godfrey and me. And he sat down at one end of this big table, and I was sitting there, and in his most gracious way, talked to me and just made me feel so at ease. And he asked me if I had anybody with me for church on Sunday morning. Our first Sunday was the next week. And my children were in college, and so I didn't expect that they would have the opportunity to be home. So he said, I always sit down in the front on the left-hand side in a certain pew, and I will sit with you on Sunday morning. And as it turned out, some of my family surprised us and came. But I never forgot that, and I always felt that wonderful, special bond with Godfrey. It was just a real special thing. But as far as my involvement in Trinity, I kind of look at myself as more of a people person. And I felt like my ministry was one of supporting my husband in his work. And I love people. And so reaching out to the congregation, mostly I saw myself as just kind of a hugger and a listener. And I tried the best I could to mentor or to support when I knew there was a need. And a couple of the things that I was involved in, I was a sponsor for a couple of the confirmands. I was their mentor and enjoyed doing that. That was wonderful. I also helped form the circle. A circle was for young women. Now they're about my age, but it was a group of young women that wanted to get together and have a new circle for the United Methodist Women. And so they still meet faithfully, but I helped organize them. I taught several Bible studies over the year, a couple of disciple classes, and several women's groups, which were very fulfilling. And the only other thing that I think about that is real outstanding to me, we started together in the home of in the living room of the parsonage, a young couple's Bible study. And there were about 6 young couples that came and said, we really want to start a Bible study. And so we brought them and we started them, and they met in the parsonage weekly for a few weeks until they got on their own. They met every Wednesday night, and that Bible study continues today. And the majority of those young couples still meet on Wednesday nights for their group.
Does the present minister have them into their home?
No,
like
we just started it in our home to help them get started.
Yeah,
And then they meet in each other's homes. And they just rotate homes and host us at each Wednesday. They have total charge of it now.
Did you find during the years you had your seat that you sat in every Sunday when at church? No?
Not somewhat, but I
Somewhat.
did move around a little
You
bit.
did
But
move around,
I'm
okay.
like a creature of habit like the rest of us, and tended to be in the same area probably, yes.
John, will you continue then about this,
Yeah.
the Oxford experience and then
Okay,
the
literature.
Yeah,
And
and
then
then,
I'd like to close with three things that meant the most to me at Trinity. First of all, we were able to, through some gracious gifts, to go to England several times, and went there, and I remember visiting Oxford, and with Pat and I went that first time, and I said, you know, my wildest dream would be to someday to be able to go to Oxford and study. I thought, nah, it's not going to happen, but that's my dream, okay? So, then a couple of years later, I get this letter in the mail that says, you're one of 40 pastors from various denominations. I mean, there were Catholic priests and Baptist and Methodist, and every denomination, not independent, and, from all over America that were selected to go and participate in the Oxford Round Table at Oxford in the debate hall, where they have different once-a-year speakers like Robert Kennedy and Ronald Reagan and Mother Teresa. And so I thought, this must be come on, I mean, why would that, I mean, it must be a scam. So, but they gave a list of others in other disciplines that had done this. One was a couple were professors at Florida State, and so I called them. They said, well, it was the greatest thing I ever did. Really? And so we went and spent a week there, and it was incredible. We stayed in one of the colleges there and ate in the dining halls. And, I mean, it was just magical. And Pat went to, and they had activities for the wives to, so it was just incredible. And through being there, and when we were there, got to meet the, and they call him principal, but president of one of the colleges at Oxford. And he arranged for me to have a fellowship to go and study at Oxford. And I'll show you in just a minute what we did with that. But I wanted to go study and then bring it back to the congregation. And as a part of that, we were studying saints and cathedrals. And we visited like 5 different cathedrals, St. Patrick's and Canterbury and Winchester Cathedral and all the several others. And then after we did that, we went to Oxford and stayed there probably about 10 days. And we got an opportunity to do my research for this in the Bodleian Library. Bodleian Library is the largest academic library in the world. And it was just incredible to be in that historic building and to do that. Now, you can't take any books out. They don't allow that. So we would go to the library during the day, and Pat was kind of my scribe. She went to and she'd take notes, and I'd tell her to look for this and look for that. And so we did that. And you know, it, with the other things, were just one of the highlights of my life. It really was. And in a moment I'll show you what I brought back to the congregation.
I think we've kind of talking a lot about it.
Okay.
You, what was this that you brought back to the congregation
Well,
from England?
Several years before, 2 years before, Barbara Hines had come to me and said the education committee met, and they would like to have a church-wide study during Lent. They would like to pick a book for congregation to study and then have you preach on it every Sunday. And I thought about it, and I said, well, we can do that, and I'll do that. But I'm not going to do somebody else's book. We're going to do my book. And so we developed what I call the Lenten Journey, and had a different theme for it every year. There's a daily prayer thing, scripture reading, and first year we did Jesus' Heart for the City, and studied about spiritual disciplines in the cities Jesus visited. The second year, we did it on John Wesley, and I was able to take the cities that he visited and where we had been, and that year I added some pictures, and I did a telephone devotional thing each week. Then the third year, we did the saints and the cathedrals, where we developed the journal with each week we did a saint and a particular cathedral, and I would preach on a characteristic of that particular saint, like, trust or hope or whatever it was. And so we would use that, and then the small groups would study this, and then with a lot of help from Rex, I had taken some videos and while we were there, and had developed a DVD for the small groups that were studying this. And on the DVD it had the choir singing, had the men, it sounds like a bunch of monks in the monastery, and then we would show pictures from the cathedral of that week. And then I would do a devotional on that characteristic and use that as a starter for the small groups. And I mean, it went really well. I remember the first time we did it, just the first one was, had like 350 people participating in small groups. So I really enjoyed going somewhere and studying and learning and bringing it back to the congregation and sharing with them my excitement about whatever it was. And so that was really a fun time and a really spiritual growth time, I believe.
What an intangible gift to give to the church. No object per se. It was all within your gift
I love doing
in
it.
assimilating the series. John, do you have, or Pat, do you have any final things you'd like to talk about Trinity before we end this interview?
Do you have anything?
I just, like I said, again, we served many wonderful churches, and I loved every place that we served. But Trinity is probably tops on the list. There's just no church like Trinity. It's
Okay.
a special blessing.
There are three things that kind of stand out to my time at Trinity. One is that that really meant a lot. I absolutely loved preaching at Trinity. I just really liked connecting with the congregation, and the second thing kind of comes into it. I love to be able to create something new and different that had never been before, and kind of, I think the message that we have, of Jesus Christ is the most exciting thing in the world, and we need to convey that excitement, and I love doing that. And I like to say Trinity is the only church that I've served that really had the horses to help me do what I wanted to do. Just one quick example. I remember when we rededicated the fellowship hall, we had renovated it. And I said, well, we just don't want to do that. And I said, I remember how when the Ark of the Covenant and had been brought back to the temple, and King David was so excited that he danced before the Ark. And so I said, we need to kind of convey that kind of excitement. And So for the sermon, I had everybody close their eyes and had a prayer. And when they opened their eyes, down the aisle comes two of the choir members carrying on poles, and in between the poles was the Ark of the Covenant that we'd had made. Actually, it was made out of styrofoam and painted gold, but it looked like the Ark of the Covenant. And they took it in and put it down. And I read the scripture and all about how David danced before it. And so what happened is I had a young woman who was a fabulous dancer, and she did a liturgical dance, and I went to Mark Rapaski, the music director, and said, Mark, I need a song that conveys this. And he said, well, John, there's not a song that conveys that. He said, but I'll write you one. And so he wrote the song to do that. So she danced before the Ark. And I got up in the front and was talking about it, and the only last thing I was like, is I remember I said something about, but you don't worship the Bible. You see, let me show you what happens if you worship the wrong thing. And I took the lid off the Ark of the Covenant and reached in and pulled out a golden calf. It was, I said, you know, when Moses went up to get the Ten Commandments, the people worshiped the golden calf. I said, you don't do that. So, you know, and, but the last thing is being a minister. Because being the pastor and the pastor at Trinity, you get to be there during the most intimate moment of people's lives. And it's such a privilege. When baby's first born, I've been in hospitals where the baby's a couple hours old or something, and the father says, you want to hold the baby? Oh my goodness. Yeah. And then later on, the baptisms, different pastors do it different ways, but I always put the baby on my shoulder, and it was the most intimate moment, because when that tiny child lays their head against your cheek, there is nothing in the world like that holy and sacred moment. I mean, really is. When, the young people are confirmed into the church, and I said, this is a big deal, and we're going to make it a big deal. So we had it where they would come up and kneel and lay hands on them. When there's a wedding, the pastor gets to look in the eyes of the couple at the moment you pronounce them husband and wife. And that is such an incredible moment. It really is. And then finally, you get to do the funerals and be with family at the very end. And to me, that was always a major deal, because this is you don't get another chance for this. This is the last chance to say goodbye. And so it is so special to be with people in this time of loss and to help them through it. It's just an incredible journey, and it's been wonderful.
John, I can't let us end this without your saying what you said so often from the pulpit. You've got to trust me on this one. Please, will you sign off with somehow incorporating that into your final remarks?
Let me just say that I used to say to them, and they loved it, we would have something coming up, like the president of the University at Oxford and going to speak, and I would always tell the congregation beforehand. I mean, you don't surprise, you build up to this, and you surprise. You build up and get them there. And said, you don't want to miss this one. Trust me on that.